With the Alabama Crimson Tide making their first ever Final Four in the university's history this season, it led me to think, when is the last time each Power 5 school made the Final Four? After days of research, I have the answer for you, and today in this video, we will do just that. Let's get right into it, starting with the Big 12, the Houston Cougars. They have made the Final Four 6 times in school history, 4 times since the NCAA started seeding teams in the tournament in 1979, 3 straight seasons in the 80s with a combo of Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler on some of those teams, and most recently in 2021 when they lost to Baylor in the Final Four. This 2021 Houston team probably had the easiest path to a Final Four in recent memory. In both the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8, they would face off against double-digit seeds in 11-seed Syracuse and 12-seed Oregon State. Current Detroit Piston and former New York Knick Quentin Grimes led this team alongside Marcus Sasser, Giroux. Guys like Jamal Shead and Juwan Roberts were freshmen on this team. It's kind of shocking to me how good Houston's been over the past 4 or 5 years, and they only have one Final Four to show for it, but that just proves to you how hard it is to make the Final Four. This video is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. If you haven't heard of it, it's an app that allows you to pick higher or lower on your favorite players from your favorite sports. And to celebrate the national championship on Monday, they are giving away $1 million, airdropping it into random accounts throughout the app. All you have to do is sign up using my code Hardwood. You'll get a full deposit match up to $100. And as long as you place a pick'em entry or you have in the past, you're good, you're eligible. And you'll also be able to use the Nikola Jokic half-point special, which ends on Saturday. Shout out to Underdog. Let's get back to the video. Just kidding. One more thing, guys. I'm going live in the Hardwood Discord tonight. We just launched it yesterday. We already have 31 members in there. Join it for the UConn-Bama game at 8 p.m. Central. The invite link is in the description. The Iowa State Cyclones have made the Final Four just once in school history in 1944, but in recent memory, they made the Elite 8. That 2000 Cyclone team was led by Jamal Tinsley and 2-time Big 12 Player of the Year and consensus All-American Marcus Fizer. The Baylor Bears have made 3 Final Fours. 2 occurred in 48 and 1950, but they would make one in 2021 as well. Matter of fact, they'd win the national title, led by a trio of Jared Butler, Matsio Teague, and Davion Mitchell. They had some fun role players in Matthew Meyer and Adam Flagler as well, but it's also shocking to me that Baylor hadn't made a Final Four before this season since 1950. The Texas Tech Red Raiders won Final Four in program history in 2019 when they were led by Jarrett Culver. I'm a Timberwolves fan, so I'm super sad he didn't work out in the NBA, but this dude put his team on his back and carried them to a national championship appearance. The BYU Cougars have never made a Final Four with 3 Elite 8 appearances, only one in the modern era in 1981. As a 6-seed star senior guard, Danny Ainge would average 24 points per game, carrying them to an Elite 8 appearance, where they would lose to a Virginia team with Ralph Sampson and Jeff Lamp. The Kansas Jayhawks have made a grand total of 16 Final Fours. Most recently, when they won the national title in 2022, they were led by Ochai Agbaji and Christian Brown of the Nuggets. Guys, I have about 60 more teams to get through, so that's why we're going so quick. Next, we have the Texas Longhorns. This one shocked me. Texas has only made 3 Final Fours, one since 1947, which happened in 2003, led by TJ Ford. They would lose to Syracuse. Yes, Carmelo Anthony's Syracuse team in the Final Four. Of course, Final Fours are very hard to make, but Texas having won since 1947. I wondered, what about Kevin Durant's 2006 Texas team? Well, I took a look. They would lose in the second round to 5-seed USC, 87-68. I did love this team though. AJ Abrams and DJ Augustine were on it as well and would continue on one season after that, making an Elite 8 run that following season, losing to Derrick Rose's Memphis. And last year's Texas team almost made the Final Four in the Elite 8 as well, losing to Miami, Florida. The TCU Horned Frogs have never made a Final Four. They've made one Elite 8, which was in 1968 when they got blown out by an Elvin Hayes Houston team. Since then, TCU has not made it past the round of 32, including back-to-back seasons in 2022 and 2023 of losing very tight games. The Oklahoma Sooners have made 5 Final Fours, most recently in 2016, led by Buddy Hield. They lost by 44 to eventual champion 2016 Villanova, which had me wondering, this has to be the largest margin of victory in a Final Four game. Let's use StatHead and check that out. Yup, it's a record. Matter of fact, it's the only 40-point defeat in Final Four history, with the next highest being in 1979, Magic Johnson's Michigan State blew out Penn by 34 points. We'll save the mid-majors for the end, but since we brought up Penn, that was their only Final Four appearance in school history. Kansas State has made 4 Final Fours, none in the modern era, most recently in 1964. They have, however, made multiple Elite Eights, including just last season in 2023, led by Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson, losing to another mid-major in Florida Atlantic. Last season was FAU's only Final Four in their 30-year Division I history. All right, I lied. We'll save most of the mid-majors for the end, but if they get brought up due to a Power 5 school, I'll just mention them now. I have to say, though, my favorite Kansas State Elite Eight run was Jacob Pullen in 2010. He averaged 22 points per game in that tournament, including 34, going 7 for 12 from 3 in a round 32 win over BYU. The Cincinnati Bearcats have made 6 Final Fours, including 5 straight from 59 to 63, 2 of those seasons being Oscar Robertson's teams. But their most recent one in modern day was a 1992 loss to the Fab Five Michigan, 76-72. UCF has never made a Final Four in its 40 seasons as a Division I program. Matter of fact, they've only made the second round once, Taco Fall's team in 2019, losing to Duke's Zion Williamson team, which had some pretty questionable calls at the end of it, losing 77-76. Oklahoma State has made 6 Final Fours, 2 in the modern era, most recently in 2004, led by Tony Allen and John Lucas. West Virginia's made 2 Final Fours, the first one in 1959 by courtesy of Jerry West, where they would lose in the national title game to Cal 71-70, and most recently in 2010, led by Deshaun Butler. This guy was one of my favorite players in college basketball growing up. This team also had Devin Ebanks and current Boston Celtics coach Joe Mazzulla. Deshaun Butler would tear his ACL midway through the second half in this game, and the moment he had with coach Bob Huggins is what makes college basketball so special to me. This injury also heavily damaged his draft stock. He was going to be a lottery pick, but ended up falling all the way to pick 42 and didn't play long in the NBA. That completes the Big 12. We'll try to move faster. We have a lot of schools to get through. Let's go to the Big 10. The Purdue Boilermakers, they've made their 3rd ever Final Four this year. I'm recording this on Friday, April 5th, so I have no idea how the Final Four or the national title game went, but most likely you're watching this at least after the Final Four. Their most recent appearance besides this season was in 1980, led by 7-foot scoring big man Joe Barry Carroll, who would go number 1 overall in the following NBA draft. The Illinois Fighting Illini have made 5 Final Fours, most recently in 2005, their greatest team in school history, led by Luther Head, Dee Brown, and Darren Williams. They would ultimately fall to North Carolina in the national title. The Nebraska Cornhuskers have never made a Final Four, but that is not all. They also have no Elite Eight appearances in school history, nor any Sweet 16s. Unfortunately, if you're a Nebraska fan, it does not stop there. They have not made even the second round. Yes, in 8 appearances in school history in the NCAA tournament, Nebraska has not won a game. This includes losing this year to Texas A&M in the first round, and the worst loss of all in 1991 as a 3 seed. They would get upset by 14 seed Xavier. The Northwestern Wildcats have never made a Final Four. Matter of fact, they've only made the NCAA tournament 3 times in program history, the past 2 seasons and 2017. But in each of those appearances, they won 1 game, which is more than Nebraska can say for itself. The Wisconsin Badgers have made 4 Final Fours in program history. Back-to-back seasons in 2014 and 2015 are most recent. That 2015 would take down an absolute juggernaut in 2015 Kentucky with Karl Anthony Towns, Devin Booker, the Harrison twins, etc. They were led by Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker. The Indiana Hoosiers have made 8 Final Fours. Most recently, though, occurred in 2002 when they would make the national championship, defeating Oklahoma. That season, they were a 5 seed and they upset an incredible Duke team led by Jay Williams, Carlos Boozer, and Mike Dunleavy. The Iowa Hawkeyes have made 3 Final Fours in program history, the most recent one being in 1980. I must warn you, I am from Iowa and a Hawkeye fan. This was my dad's heyday, so I have a little more details about this Final Four run. They had this point guard named Ronnie Lester who got hurt during the regular season, so Iowa was a 5 seed in the tournament. But during that regular season, they were 15-1 with Ronnie. He would return for the NCAAs, upset number 1 seed Syracuse in the Sweet 16, and then narrowly beat Georgetown with Sleepy Floyd 81-80 on an and one by Steve Waite. There's no shot clock at that point, so Iowa held the ball for over 2 minutes. Just imagine losing on a game-winning basket where the team had the ball with 2 minutes to play and just held it. Iowa did come back from 14 points in the second half in this game, sending them to the Final Four, where they would lose to Daryl Griffith and Louisville, the eventual national champions. But here's something not many people know about this game. Ronnie Lester would re-injure that knee and not return just 12 minutes into the game. He had 10 points and was a perfect 4 for 4 from the field before going out. It's another huge what if for the University of Iowa. A lot of Hawkeye fans think they win the national title that year with Ronnie. Maybe, maybe not, but it's what I love and hate most about college sports. Everything is finite. Versus the NBA, it feels like you have a bigger window. With college, it's not even usually 4 years. It's a 2 to 3 year window with a certain group of guys to get the job done, and then it's over forever for that group. The Maryland Terrapins have made the Final Four just twice in program history. Believe it or not, in back-to-back seasons, 01 and 02, led both times by Juan Dixon. In 01, they'd lose in the Final Four. In 2002, they would win it all, giving them their first and only national title. Michigan State has made it to 10 Final Fours, most recently 2019. They would lose to aforementioned Texas Tech. The Michigan Wolverines have been to 8 Final Fours, most recently 2018, with a team consisted of Mo Wagner, Jordan Poole, and Duncan Robinson. The Minnesota Golden Gophers have made just 1 Final Four in program history, led by JUCO transfer Bobby Jackson in 1997. Ohio State made the Final Four in 2012. It's their last of 11 appearances. They were led by Jared Sullinger. Aaron Kraft was on that team as well. But my favorite Ohio State team was the one that made the Final Four right before that one in 2007, led by freshman duo Greg Oden and Mike Conley. Penn State has just made 1 Final Four in 1954. The closest they've gotten since then is the Sweet 16 2 different times, most recently in 2001. Rutgers has 1 Final Four appearance in university history in 1976. They would lose to Michigan by 16. That Rutgers team was very good. They were 31-2 that year and were led by senior forward Phil Sellers. That wraps up the Big Ten. Let's move over to the ACC. North Carolina has made a Division I leading 21 Final Fours, most recently in 2022 when 8 seed North Carolina made the national championship. I think we all remember that one pretty vividly. Duke has made 17 Final Fours in program history. Their last one also in 2022, losing to that North Carolina team in the Final Four. That team had guys like Paolo Banchero, Wendell Moore, Mark Williams, AJ Griffin, and it was Coach K's farewell season. I was a little shocked to see Duke had only made the Final Four 2 times since that 2010 team, and only 5 times in the last 24 years. Virginia has made 3 Final Fours, most recently 2019 when they redeemed themselves, being the first 1 seed to lose to a 16 in 2018. Pittsburgh has made 1 Final Four in 1941, but I'm not sure you can fully count it. There was only 8 teams in the tournament. Their furthest run in modern day was in 2009. They made the Elite 8 before they lost to Villanova, but this Pitt team was one to remember. You had DeJuan Blair, Sam Young, and Levance Fields. The Syracuse Orange have made 6 Final Fours, most recently 2016, one of the most random Final Four runs of the past 2 decades. A 10-seed Syracuse team that some had not even making the field. Clemson has never made a Final Four. They've made 2 Elite 8s this season and in 1980. The NC State Wolfpack have made 3 Final Fours, including this season. They play tomorrow as I'm recording this. If they win it, they would become the first 11 seed ever to just make a national title game, and of course would be following quickly in the footsteps of that 1983 squad with Jimmy V. The Louisville Cardinals have made 10 Final Fours, most recently 2013 when they defeated 9 seed Wichita State. This team had guys like Russ Smith and Peyton Siva, but their championship was vacated due to some recruiting stuff with Rick Pitino, which gives us our third mid-major to talk about. Wichita State, they've made 2 Final Fours, most recently this season with Ron Baker, Cleanthony Early, Carl Hall, and freshman Fred VanVleet, who played a little bit. This is one of my favorite Final Four teams in recent memory, and it's so odd to me that it was this team that made the Final Four, and the following season when Fred VanVleet took on a bigger role, same with Ron Baker as sophomores, would go undefeated in the regular season but get upset in the second round. Virginia Tech has never made a Final Four. They've made the Elite 8 once in 1967 as Virginia Poly, and in 2019 they lost in the Sweet 16 to Zion's Duke team 75-66. 1973. I gotta mention it because I'm a Timberwolves fan. Nickeil Alexander-Walker led this team for the Hokies. Wake Forest has made one Final Four in 1962, where they were led by 30-point-per-game scorer Len Chappell. In 1996, Tim Duncan would lead them to the Elite Eight. But what I really wanted to know was how far Chris Paul's Wake Forest team had gotten. I was only 7 at the time. I remember loving Chris Paul in college, but my memory had failed me, so I looked it up, and they would lose in the Sweet 16 to #1 seed St. Joe's, led by Delonte West and Jameer Nelson. Georgia Tech has made it twice to the Final Four, most recently in 2004, where they were led by Jarrett Jack, losing in the championship game to Emeka Okafor's UConn team. Notre Dame has made one Final Four in 1978. This team was loaded with NBA talent, but my personal favorite Notre Dame team comes from 2015. They had Jarian Grant, Pat Connaughton, and Demetrius Jackson. They almost upset #1 Kentucky in the Elite Eight. Boston College has 0 Final Fours in their history, 3 Elite Eights, most recently in 1994 as a 9 seed. Florida State made one Final Four in 1972. They actually made it to the title game, lost a close game to undefeated UCLA with Bill Walton, 81-76. The furthest they've made it in the modern era was in 2018 when they fell to Michigan in the Elite Eight. Terrence Mann of the Clippers was on that team. Our final ACC team, Miami, Florida, made their first ever Final Four just last season in 2023, and the season before made their only ever Elite Eight in 2022. Isaiah Wong and Jordan Miller were absolute bucket getters for that 2023 Miami team and played huge roles on the 2022 team as well. Next, we'll do the Big East, then the SEC and the Pac-12, followed lastly by any mid-major schools we have not covered just yet. In the Big East, Marquette Golden Eagles, the last time they've made the Final Four was in 2003, giving them just their 3rd Final Four of all time. This team, of course, was led by Dwayne Wade. They'd get blown out in that game versus Kansas, but nonetheless, Wade put up an incredible tournament run to just get his team to the Final Four for the first time since the mid-70s. UConn has made 7 Final Fours, with all of them coming in the last 25 years. They won the national championship last year, and this year, we'll see what happens. Like I said, I'm recording this on Friday before the Final Four, but they've made it for back-to-back seasons. The Creighton Blue Jays have never made a Final Four. They have made 2 Elite Eights in 1941 and just last season, where they would lose to the eventual national runner-up San Diego State on a pretty iffy foul call that put SDSU up 1 with less than a second left. The Seton Hall Pirates have one Final Four appearance in program history. It took place in 1989, where they would make the national title game, losing to Glenn Rice's Michigan team by 1 point. That game went to overtime. It had somewhat of a controversial ending as well. They called a hand check foul with barely any time left on the clock, giving Michigan a 1-point lead. That was also the tournament that Glenn Rice put up the most points in a single NCAA tournament, scoring 184 points in 6 games. St. John's has made 2 Final Fours, once in 1952 and most recently in 1985, where they were led by Chris Mullen and Walter Berry. They would lose by 18 to Patrick Ewing's Georgetown team. The Villanova Wildcats have made 7 Final Fours, most recently in 2022, where they would lose to Kansas. Providence has made 2 Final Fours in their program history, most recently in 1987. I did not realize this, but Billy Donovan, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls, former Florida Gators head coach, former OKC Thunder head coach, was their best player, scoring 20.6 points per game, standing at 6 feet tall. This team was a 6 seed, and they were coached by Rick Pitino. They'd fall to number 2 Syracuse in the Final Four, 77-63. The Butler Bulldogs have made 2 Final Fours in back-to-back seasons, 2010 and 2011. They were not a part of the Big East at the time. They were a part of the Horizon League and were a mid-major. Coached by current GM of the Celtics, Brad Stevens, and led by Gordon Hayward in 2010 and Shelvin Mack and Matt Howard in 2010 and 2011. They would make the national championship game both seasons, falling short both times, with the 2010 game being Gordon Hayward's half-court buzzer beater that refused to go down. The Xavier Musketeers have never made a Final Four, but they have made 3 Elite Eights, including in 2017 as an 11 seed. Georgetown has 5 appearances in their history, most recently 2007. This was that Jeff Green and Roy Hibbert team that would lose to Mike Conley and Greg Oden of Ohio State. Our final Big East team, the DePaul Blue Demons, have made 2 Final Fours, one in 1943, another in 1979, where they would lose to Indiana State 76-74. This team had Mark Aguirre as a freshman who averaged 24 points per game and 7.6 boards. This was the beginning of DePaul's golden age. Over the next 3 seasons in 80, 81, and 82, they would lose a combined 6 times, giving them a #1 seed in each of those tournaments, but they would lose in the second round each time. Back then, the #1 seed got a bye, so DePaul did not win an NCAA tournament game in 3 seasons straight as a #1 seed. Since we mentioned them, one of the most iconic mid-major Final Four runs of all time, 1979 Indiana State, led by Larry Bird, who put up an absurd 28.6 points per game, 14.9 rebounds, and 5.5 assists. Larry Bird was basically Caitlin Clark at Iowa 45 years ago. They would fall to Magic Johnson and Michigan State in the national title game, with their only loss on the season being in that game. Next, we have the SEC, starting with the Alabama Crimson Tide. Like I mentioned in the intro, 2024 is their first Final Four ever. They did make one other Elite Eight in 2004, falling to Connecticut. We're 2/3 the way through this video, and it still baffles me how hard it really is to get to the Final Four in any given year for a Power 5 school. The Arkansas Razorbacks have made 6 Final Fours, 3 in the 90s, including in back-to-back seasons 94 and 1995. Led by Corliss Williamson and Scotty Thurman, they would win it all in 94 and lose to UCLA in the title game in 1995. Auburn has made just 1 Final Four. It was in 2019. They would lose to eventual champion Virginia, 63-62. The Tigers would lose one of their best players in Chuma Okeke in the Sweet 16, injuring his knee in the Sweet 16 versus UNC. It's a big what if for that Auburn team. He had 20 and was 8 of 11 from the field with 11 boards when he went down. The Florida Gators have 5 appearances in school history, the latest coming in 2014, coached by Billy Donovan, losing to Shabazz Napier's 7-seed UConn team. The University of Georgia has made just 1 Final Four appearance in 1983 as a 4-seed. They would lose to that iconic NC State team 67-60. Although Kentucky is tied with Duke all time in Final Four appearances at 3rd with 17, they haven't made one since 2015. We mentioned this team earlier. They were undefeated on the season leading into this game and were absolutely loaded with the Harrison twins, Devin Booker, Karl Anthony Towns, Willie Cauley-Stein, and Trey Lyles. The LSU Tigers have 4 Final Four appearances in their history, most recently 2006 with Big Baby Davis and Tyrus Thomas. The Mississippi State Bulldogs have 1 Final Four appearance. It occurred in 1996. The Missouri Tigers have 0 Final Fours in program history, but they do have 5 Elite Eights, most notably and recently in 2009 as a 3-seed. Ole Miss has never made a Final Four either. Matter of fact, they have 0 Elite Eight runs as well, and just 1 Sweet 16 in 2001 as a 3-seed. South Carolina does have a Final Four appearance in their history, and it happened recently in 2017. They would lose to Gonzaga. This one's probably fresh in your memory. It was only 7 years ago, and they were led by 2 guys, Sindarius Thornwell and PJ Dozier. This one would have surprised me if I wasn't doing research already for March Madness recap videos this year, but the Tennessee Volunteers have never made a Final Four and have just 2 Elite Eight appearances this season and in 2010. As much as Tennessee shocked me, Texas A&M having 0 Final Four appearances shocked me even more. And they also don't have any Elite Eight, but they have made the Sweet 16 6 times. Most recently in 2018, but again in 2016, that was the team that was dead in the water versus UNI in the second round, before Northern Iowa gave up a double-digit lead in under a minute. Vanderbilt has not made a Final Four either. They have 1 Elite Eight appearance dating back all the way to 1965, and their most recent Sweet 16 appearance took place in 2007. Our final major conference, the Pac-12, starting with Arizona State. They also have 0 Final Four appearances, 3 Elite Eight, the latest one being all the way back in 1979, led by Lionel Hollins, who coached in the NBA for a while. Arizona has 4 Final Four appearances, most recently in 2001, defeating Michigan State. This team had Gilbert Arenas and Richard Jefferson. The University of California has 3 Final Four appearances, but not one since 1960. The closest they've gotten in recent memory was 1993 when Jason Kidd led them to the Sweet 16. The University of Colorado has 2 appearances in the Final Four in 1955 and 1942. Outside of that, the furthest they have gone in the modern day is the round of 32 4 times, including this season, falling to Marquette. The Oregon Ducks have 2 Final Four appearances, 1939 and 2017. That 17 team was led by Dylan Brooks, Tyler Dorsey, Jordan Bell, and Chris Boucher. Peyton Pritchard was also on that team. They would lose by 1 point to North Carolina in the Final Four. Oregon State also has 2 Final Four appearances, but both a very long time ago in 1949 and 1963. In recent memory, they have reached the Elite Eight a few times, most notably in 2021, which I like to call the most random Elite Eight team of all time. They bid stole by winning the Pac-12 tournament and then just went on an absolute heater as a 12 seed. Stanford has 2 Final Fours to their name. Most recently in 1998, they would lose in overtime to Kentucky. I'll be honest though, I didn't recognize a lot of names on that team, so some of you old heads may have to educate us in the comments. I did recognize Mark Madsen though. I'm pretty sure he played for the Timberwolves at one point. UCLA is second all time in Final Fours with 19 of them, and most recently they made a run as an 11 seed to 1 in 2021, led by Johnny Juzang, Jaime Jaquez, and Tiger Campbell. They would lose in overtime in one of my favorite Final Four games in recent memory to a Jalen Suggs half quarter. I also have to mention the 2008 UCLA team. They had Kevin Love, Russell Westbrook, and Darren Collison. They made the Final Four but would lose to Derrick Rose's Memphis squad, which we'll talk about later. USC has not made a Final Four since 1954, but they did make an Elite Eight in 2021, led by Evan Mobley. The University of Utah has a surprising 4 Final Four runs in their program history, most recently 1998, when they made the national title game. This team had Andre Miller and 2 other leading scorers I don't recognize, but I'm sure some of you in the comments will. Finally, we have our 2 Washington schools. We'll start with Washington State. Outside of a Final Four run in 1941, that again, anything from the 40s, there's only 8 teams. Washington State has not made a Sweet 16 except for in 2008. The only name I recognized on this team was Aaron Baines. I wondered how far Klay Thompson's teams got, but they actually never made the tournament, including his junior season. And lastly, our final school of the Pac-12, the University of Washington Huskies. Similar to Washington State, they've only made a Final Four in 1953, but unlike their rival, they've made 4 other Sweet 16 since, most notably in 2010. They would lose to that Deshaun Butler West Virginia team, but I like this roster. They had Quincy Pondexter, Isaiah Thomas, and Justin Holiday. Still here past the 30-minute mark. I appreciate it. I tried to go as fast as possible, but there's so many schools to get through. Because this video is already so long, we're calling an audible. I'll just highlight a few of the most prominent mid-major Final Four runs that we haven't covered yet. Number 1, UNLV. They've made 3, most recently in 1991. All 3 of those took place with Jerry Tarkanian under the helm in 87, 90, and 91, and they almost took down Duke in that final 1991 year. Larry Johnson was their best player. Memphis has 3 Final Fours to their name, 1 in recent memory. 2008, freshman Derrick Rose led them there with the help of Chris Douglas Roberts and Joey Dorsey. They would lose to an incredible Kansas team in overtime. UMass had a Final Four run in 1996. They were 35-2 on the year, coached by John Calipari and led by Marcus Camby. VCU in 2011, we talked about them in former videos. Shaka Smart led this team from the first 4 to the Final Four, becoming just the second 11 seed at the time to ever do that, and the first while playing an extra game. San Diego State made a national title last year, which obviously includes a Final Four for the first time in school history. And then, of course, Gonzaga has made 2 Final Fours. It's hard to consider them a mid-major at this point, but still they technically are, in 2017 and 2021. 2018, Loyola Chicago. They made one in 1963 as well, where they won it all. But this one was extra special. They were an 11 seed. You had Sister Jean cheering them the whole way. There was something just magical about it. 2006, George Mason. They had an incredible Elite Eight game versus UConn that they won in overtime, coached by current Miami, Florida coach Jim Larinaga. I think that about wraps it up. Yes, I went a little faster at the end here. My apologies. This video was getting way too long, but I hope you enjoyed it still. I'm sure I made a couple mistakes. Feel free to point them out in the comments. Remember to join the Discord. I'm going live for Game 2 tonight, UConn versus Bama. And as always, we'll see you on the hardwood.